Welcome to the 17th Annual PD Fiction and Poetry Festival. We're thrilled to be welcoming our featured writers, Jamila Minnicks, Santiago Garcia, and Joangela Edwins. Unfortunately, Franny Choi could not be with us due to a family emergency. Our thoughts are with Franny and her family today. We'll have poet and professor Adam Houle sitting on this morning's panel, and poet Al Black will be here tomorrow, and we are so glad to have them here to talk about their poetry. Just a quick reminder as we get started, please make sure to turn off your cell phones and put those away. Give your full attention to the writers on the stage. If you need to step out of the auditorium, please do so quietly. We only get to have this event once a year, and we want to make sure we're fully present for it. Thank you. My name is Landon Houle. I'm an associate professor of English and creative writing here at Francis Marion University. I'll briefly introduce you to Joangela Edwins, right back there. Professor of English and Creative Writing at FMU, Poet Laureate of the PD, and a featured writer at this year's festival. You'll be learning more about Joangela and her poetry later on this morning, but throughout the year, I'm fortunate to work with Joangela to coordinate the PD Fiction and Poetry Festival. I'll speak for both of us and say we're so happy you all are here with us to celebrate literature and reading today. Thank you for being here. We would first and foremost like to thank the president of Francis Marion University, Dr. Carter. Dr. Carter is here with us today. Hello, Dr. Carter.
Yay.
We would like to thank Dr. Carter and Mrs. Folly Carter for their enthusiastic support of the festival and literature, both on and beyond our campus. Thank you also to our provost, Dr. Alyssa Waters. Thank you to our friends and colleagues in the English and Modern Languages departments, including our chairs, Dr. Meredith Love and Dr. Sean Smolin-Morton. Special thanks to Kristen Kiley, Adam Houle, Meredith Reynolds, Lance Weldy, Benjamin Hill, Casey Wilson, Jason Marley, and Caleb Doan, as well as our Snow Island Review and Festival interns, James Parker and Madison Woodle. You all have generously given your time and energy to make sure this festival is a success, and we appreciate you so much. We could not do this festival without the expertise and assistance of our wider FMU family in various departments: Anna Todd, Kelly Cross, and Larry Falk in communications, Jennifer Hester in purchasing, Donald Jackson and Jasmine Bellamy in accounting, Jen Jenkins in catering, Steve Jackson, Michael Lynch, Ben Strickland in facilities and grounds, Nick Townsend in the foundation office, and everyone at the cottage, the FMU admissions office, Jenna Parker and Jasmine Richardson at the Barnes & Noble bookstore. You might have noticed there are books for sale in the lobby right outside the auditorium. There will be book signings after the evening reading, so make sure to pick up some copies for those autographs tonight and tomorrow. One last thank you to our students. This semester you have read and studied and questioned and admired and sometimes even struggled with the poetry and fiction of this year's featured writers. You have allowed yourself to be open to and moved by literature, and you are here today to meet the people behind the stories and the poems that are now a part of your universe, the way you're seeing the world today. Thank you for your time, your dedication, your attention, and your passion. And thank you again to everyone this morning. With that, we'll begin our festival with our first panel, featuring Jamila Minnicks and Adam Houle. Our panel will be moderated by Dr. Lance Weldy. Dr. Lance Weldy is a professor of English at FMU. Dr. Weldy teaches classes in freshman composition and children's and young adult literature. He has co-edited several collections of scholarship on children's literature, and his most recent publication is the edited anthology, BJU and Me, Queer Voices from the World's Most Christian University, published by the University of Georgia Press. Please help me welcome Dr. Weldy, Jamila Minnicks, and Adam Houle.
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning. Can you hear me? I'm testing out a new mic. All right. If it's too much, tell me to lower. Oh, I'm getting a lot of thumbs up. This is great. All right. Okay. If I need to lower it, thumb it down, but we're good for now. Well, good morning, and welcome to panel session number 1 at the PD Fiction and Poetry Festival. And I'm going to say it again, to battle our screen addictions, please make sure you silence your phones and put them in your bag, not in your pockets, because we all know you're going to reach for that, your phantom limb there, so to speak. So please let me be the one to keep track of your time. I have a giant clock right here, and so I will not let you out late. So let me be the one to keep track of all that stuff. So anyway, I'm Dr. Lance Weldy from the English department, and I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Jamila Minnicks. You may notice a slight change is what we have already talked about. Dr. Adam, who will be from the English department, has joined this panel to offer his insights from a poet's perspective. His first book, Stray, was a finalist for the Colorado Book Award. His poems have appeared in Agni, Shenandoah, Blackbird, and elsewhere. Jamila Minnick's novel, Moonrise Over New Jessup, from Algonquin Books in 2023, won the 2021 PEN Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. In 2022, she was awarded a Tennessee Williams Scholarship for the Sewanee Writers Conference, and she also earned a residency at the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts. Her short fiction and essays have been published in Craft, Catapult, Blackbird, The Right Launch, and elsewhere. Her piece, Politics of Distraction, was nominated for the Pushcart Prize. Minnicks is a graduate of the University of Michigan, the Howard University School of Law, and the Georgetown University Law Center. She lives in Washington, D.C. For this session, we will be talking with Jamila about her work, which could include Moonrise Over New Jessup, which can be purchased in the lobby, as Dr. Landon Houle already said. And Adam will be part of this conversation as well, offering insight about the writing process and more. First, I would like to ask Jamila to read a short passage from her work, and then I'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll go into lightning round and Q&A and all that sort of stuff. So let's hear from Jamila.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? All right, good. I just want to say thank you all to the PD Poetry and Fiction Festival for having me here. Thank you all for engaging with the work. And I know we're living in some challenging times. I appreciate everybody here being willing to engage with some things and some themes that we're still dealing with today. So I'm going to read, how many of you all have had an opportunity to read the book? I think this is like no spoilers conversation today, so I'm not going to spoil anything, but New Jessup is the story of Alice Young, who is a woman who gets off in an all-black settlement in a place called New Jessup, Alabama. And when she moves there, that's 1957, she's never lived in a place or seen a place, an all-black settlement. And so she gets off the bus just sort of because the bus stops there, and I want to read to you what she sees when she gets off the bus. We shushed to a stop and the bus emptied, some getting off, hugging loved ones hello, some taking luggage from the belly of the bus, and most everybody stretching, smiling, and laughing underneath the blue sky day. But the stops were all the same to me, so I stayed inside with my head against the glass, feeling the sun's warmth on the window. That's when a red-heeled shoe clicked its way up the sidewalk. Two of them, if I'm honest, so it wasn't so much the shoes that caught my eye, but the bronze-stockinged legs inside them. They continued up the way towards a sidewalk cafe before disappearing through the front door. My eyes traveled from the cafe to the paved sidewalk to the row of brick-front shops lining a wide avenue. The sun gleamed from the white tile at the bus depot, and a polished chrome dog leapt over the door. But a couple folks, some like me, the other nothing like me, looked around unsure what we were seeing. When the man seated next to me returned smelling of cigarettes and shoe polish, he urged me off the bus with a dime from his own pocket. Miss, our next stop ain't for quite a while, and this here is a good place to stretch your legs. Why don't you go on inside and get yourself a Coca-Cola before we pull off again? Before stepping foot to pavement, I hovered in the doorway of that bus. To the left and the right, the avenue, the sidewalk, the storefronts, all extended to the horizon in either direction. But reaching the front door of the depot, the colored entrance was nowhere in sight. To my right, a shoeshine man chewed a toothpick while he studied the shoe and the polish in his hands from every angle. Behind me, from the bus window, the man urged me through the door, only the last thing I needed was to be arrested just for going through the front door to buy a Coke. Help you, miss? Asked that shoeshine man. So the words eased from his mouth, he'd done his level best to ignore me. With the weather-beaten hand-me-downs on my feet, it was no wonder why. I'm looking for the colored entrance, please, I said to the pavement, not wanting to be pegged ignorant of city ways and where they hid the Negro doorways. "You won't find one of them here," he said. "Just walk in." "I prefer the colored entrance. Please," I insisted. He had seemed an unusual man, perhaps a prankster of some sort, with the long limbs, triangular head, and bulging eyes of a chameleon. Just the sort to make trouble for folks and dart away. "We ain't got one of them, 'cause ain't nothing but Negroes in this town, is what I'm telling you. Just look around and see if you see any white folks other than these sorry few from the buses." He smirked and returned his attention to the shoe in his hand, satisfied he knew the lay of the land. A dark brown man sold bus tickets and answered questions inside, while two soldiers in Army-issue khaki rushed past me, one with the deep mulberry skin of the ready harvest, and the other, my same sun-gold cinnamon with dark freckles on his cheeks, who placed a hand to his peaked cap. A light-skinned woman with a wild mane of bottle-red hair rushed into a yellow cab driven by a portly man of pecan complexion. He sped past an ebony police officer in white gloves holding palms up, meaning stop. A deep bronzed man across the street wore pink-covered bib overalls, smoking a cigarette next to another bib-overalled man, Cocoa Brown. And the family by the drink machine, well, the mama, she was high yellow, but her husband was a rich, deep brown to match some good, peaty soil. One child favored him, one her, and one fell to a brown somewhere in the middle, and that was just within those few feet of me at the depot. Up and down the avenue, Negroes of every shade came together like the dusk in a fall forest. I should have been glad, relieved to find such a sight on my journey, but my knees gave out and I sank onto the bench next to the shoeshine man. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed. "Ain't our folks' usual reaction when they first arrive in New Jessup," he said, patting my shoulder with the light taps of a man unaccustomed to comforting people. I stopped crying in time to wave the bus off, too exhausted to shed another drop. "Is there a church house nearby?" I asked. "Pastor and Mrs. Brown will take right good care of you up at Morning Star Baptist," he said, and with walking directions, he sent me on my way. But after I took a couple steps up the sidewalk, he called out. When I turned, he spoke to the stain on my dress and the marks on my arm that weariness had me forgetting to hide. "But miss, if you looking for white folks, and I don't imagine that you would be, but say you are, well, you'd have to get all the way to the other side of the woods to find a single one." And I'll stop there.
Thank you for that. That was great. You just mentioned something about timeliness, and that was one of my first question I wanted to ask you. So the dust jacket describes your book this way. Based on the history of many black towns and settlements established across the country, Jamila Minnicks' heartfelt and riveting debut is both a celebration of black joy and a timely examination of the opposing viewpoints that attended desegregation in America. I think we've all had time to think deeply, and we still are in that moment, about our nation's current events from this week. When thinking about the timeliness of your book, how does your book feel even more relevant now in light of the current elections?
I don't know that it feels any more relevant.
Okay.
I think that it feels like some of the themes in the book have been laid bare in a way over this, I would say, the course of the election season, certainly. Some of the rhetoric that has certainly been, spat out by people who were talking about, passing on really terrible things about people who look like me, people who look like you, people who look like all of us. I think some very unflattering and terrible things have been said. And so I think the book really challenges, this question of what are we really asking of, I will say black communities, because that's what the book is about. What are we asking of black people when this, to integrate into? And I think that was the question that was certainly a part that attended these communities. I think it's something that we're still perpetually asking people, what is the sales pitch still for integration these days? I mean, what are we asking people to do? I'm a writer. I was a lawyer before I was a writer. Words are incredibly powerful. And it's not just the way that we call names. You know, I think that meanness is something that America has grappled with for a long time, and we're seeing sort of the danger of that now. But I think words in general have meaning. So when you say this word integration, what do we mean by it? Do we mean fellowship? Do we mean assimilation? Do we mean erasure? What do we mean? And so I think that that's something that we're still very much grappling with.
Yeah, thank you. And Adam, I don't know if you had any thoughts about that as well.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, in specific with Moonrise over New Jessup, Jamila, I wonder about the roundedness of the characters as well, right? As, you know, you said, you know, this, like, what does the word integration mean for these characters? And one thing that my classes and I really admired, and I think which is something that fiction allows, is a sustained development. And I was wondering if you could build on that idea of how you see the characters relating as well.
You know, I think we can go around this room, and I always ask whenever I give one of these talks, I ask people to define what the word freedom means. And I think if we look around this room and I'm not just saying like define it like some academic exercise. I understand we are at Francis Marion University, and we ask you all to be really, really deep thinkers in that way. But when I say define it, like, what does it taste like? What does it feel like on your skin? What does it smell like? What does it look like? I know that freedom for me is a huge garden. I'm a terrible gardener, but it's a huge garden where I can get out and have my hands in the dirt. It's land, it's being outside, it's being with my family, right? So I think when you think about the roundness of the characters, the people in the book, you have to consider that each one of them, I mean, even the way that in that passage I read, they share a skin color. I mean, there are more ways to describe black people than there are ways to describe anything, because we are diverse. Our skin colors, our ideologies are diverse. And so when you think about how these people come together in any community, you have to think about what freedom means to each of them. You know, Patience is going to have a very different ideology, and does have a very different ideology of the framework of freedom than Alice did. But they can all still very much love New Jessup. And so I think that when the best literature, when you're reading books, particularly about, you know, this is a small town in Alabama. It's like where my family came up. But everybody we're not in lockstep about what we think freedom looks like and how we think it should be achieved. So, you know, I'm happy that came through on the page.
My next question is starting off with Adam about poetry, but you just said, what does freedom taste like? It sounds very poetic the way you said that. So I was going to ask Adam, like, how do you think writing poetry differs or is similar to writing fiction? But maybe there's a lot of overlap there.
I think architecture. Right. I think that, you know, when I imagine a novel, I end up sort of feeling there's a lot of blank spaces to fill. Right. I'm imagining this sort of large frame. And, you know, some of the passages in Moonrise that strike me as the most poetic are the ones where I just sort of linger. I mill about in an image. I spend time there. And I lose sight of sometimes, you know, in my own imagination, I lose sight of the frame of the novel. And so I wonder, sometimes for me, it feels like it's the ability to sustain over a longer period of time, right? That you know, the majority of poems being written are going to be under, you know, 40 lines anymore, right? These smaller lyric moments. And that's where I pedal, which, you know, pushing myself to write longer pieces makes me admire the architecture more. So I think that would be the off the top of my head, the biggest difference, right? I think right away.
But you know what's so interesting about that too, is I love writing flash fiction. And so I think flash is really, it helps writers, prose writers particularly, figure out how to be economical, but also find the poetry and the flow and the cadence in their language. And so I always admire poets because you all say so much with so few words. Like, because I think people who write novels, they write novels because they have a lot of words to say. And sometimes that's really a disservice to the work, because I'm sure you all have read novels, maybe you even read New Jessup, I hope not. But you find yourself glazing over large passages because it's just a big block of words without much meaning. So when I was writing New Jessup, I was reading a lot of poetry, writing a lot of flash fiction, because I so admire what you were able to do.
So, I mean, thinking about form then with flash fiction is sort of these short pieces that seem to have a beginning, middle, and end, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
that there's this narrative arc in this really small space. I wonder if you see moments in Moonrise over New Jessup as almost flash pieces. Part of this interlocking novel, but are there certain moments that you find are your favorite from a stylistic perspective?
Well, it's like when you ask your parents if you're their favorite. It's like, no.
The answer is yes.
It's like I don't have a favorite, but I don't know that I have a part that is flash fiction. I think for me there are two things that influence New Jessup. Obviously, the voice of my elders, my ancestors, are the ones who gave voice to it, because Alice is all the women in my family. So you have to be true to, when you're writing particularly historical fiction based on real people, real places, that voice is critical. When my family, I was telling you last night, my family read the book and I was shaking, because I was like, all the people in the world may have something to say, but if my family had disagreed or disliked this book, I never would have released it. But to the point about flash fiction, I think what it did overall was help me to use the language economically, because I love my ancestors, my elders. Some of those stories go on forever. So, I wanted to make sure that the story actually had movement, that there was progression. And so that's where I think just practicing flash fiction really helped me to make this book feel like it had some forward movement.
There were poetic moments for me when you're describing in your book plants, nature, gardening. Those are the moments that stick out right away for me after finishing it, that you can tell there's love there. And it's funny you said you're not a really good gardener.
I love gardening, but gardening does not love me.
Okay.
And so
Okay.
there are certain things, like my azaleas, I would put them up against anybody's azaleas. I have been trying for years, so if any of y'all have any tips about hydrangeas, I will kill a hydrangea in a second. But I keep putting them in the ground because I love them, and my neighbors have all these tips. I mean, we've actually had meetings about my hydrangeas in the neighborhood, about the things that I'm doing wrong, bone meal, and I need eggshells and coffee grounds and banana peels, all these things. I have done all these things to no avail. And so I'm just blaming the soil. But my azaleas just really pop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Adam mentioned the large frame, the architecture of a novel. And I want to ask one more question before we go into the lightning round and the Q&A portion. I was thinking about your writing, and I have the deepest respect for fiction writers for many reasons, especially for how you craft the plot of your narrative. Specifically, if we can, I'd like to hear from your experience and perspective on how you figured out how to end this book. Now, it's funny, at breakfast, some of us talked about giving away spoilers, and so we hadn't talked about that. So you can tell what you want, but could you tell us your writing process with the ending? Did you have multiple endings or earlier versions of the ending? Did it organically move in that direction? Did you have discussions with your editor about it? What was it like getting to the end?
So that was the only ending I've ever written.
Okay.
It was, there are parts of the book, and in my book now that I've written, that I can write it in maybe the first or second draft. I can say, needs a little wordsmithing, but this is it. Print it. Let's go. And that's how I felt about the ending. And I'll tell you why, I don't want to spoil it. I'm not going to tell y'all exactly how it ends, but historically speaking, that kind of ending happened. And so I felt like I particularly in historical fiction, I think sometimes there's an impetus to change historical fiction to match a history we wanted to see. And it certainly could have gone a different way. It certainly could have been, puppies and rainbows. And, but I felt ancestrally, and I feel a responsibility to my ancestors, my elders, who've really lived this history. So on that score, yes, it was something that very much came organically. And then later, after one of my cousins, my elder cousin, read the book, she said, "How did you know about our uncle?"
Oh.
And I said, "What uncle?" And she said, "Exactly, because that followed the trajectory of an uncle of ours that generations later." So, I think that felt true, and I think I wouldn't rewrite it. I know that I get a lot of questions about it, and sort of like, what comes next questions.
Yeah.
Which I know the answer to. But I do want to make sure that I'm not rewriting history in a way that does a disservice to what the people who came before me accomplished, built, did, suffered, and survived. So.
Okay, I like that. All right, so I want to shift gears here, and the next part of our show, or our panel, is called the lightning round. And this glamorous Rubbermaid Tupperware are folded up questions, and I'm going to ask you to take turns, or you could, however the spirit's moving, if you want to both answer the same question, or we'll see where it's going there. Grab a slip of paper. You can give a brief response, as brief as you want to. And I think perhaps between the lightning round, we'll have James and Madison take our microphones and start thinking, going towards any audience members. We want to hear from you also. So I thought we would alternate from a lightning round question with someone from the audience. So does anyone here have questions that you would like to ask Jamila? Okay, so we already see some hands. So James and Madison are going to grab Adam's mic. You get to keep yours, and you'll share. And we'll grab that one. And they're going to go make their way. Keep your hands up, and they're going to come find you. And Jamila's going to grab the first piece of paper, and they're going to go find and be ready to...
I feel like the easier ones will be on the bottom.
You can shuffle it. It's not rigged.
No, it's okay.
I don't think.
It's okay. That's all right. We're going to do this one.
Okay.
All right.
Oh.
So the question is, what is one published book or play from a contemporary writer that you wish you could have written? Ooh. It's an easy answer, Imani Perry's South to America. Because this book, it's nonfiction, so I'm not a nonfiction writer, so I can safely say I wish I could have written it, but I probably. But it is a testament to how the American South is really America. And I think when I was dealing with New Jessup, when I was first writing New Jessup, I remember it was the 2020 election, and there was a lot of these pundits were going around and saying, if Georgia doesn't turn blue, then let Georgia secede. And there's sort of this really negative outlook about the South in general. My people are Alabama. I come from a family that says the sin is not in the soil, the sin is in the hearts of man. I love Alabama. I love South Carolina. I lived here for 4 years. So I'm not somebody who's going to say, let's just give up on people because of where they live, right? And so Imani's book really is this beautiful exploration that shows people that the South got something to say. And so if I had been as talented as the sister, I would have written that book.
Okay, I like that. Adam, do you have...
Freddie Lindsay's poem, The Host, which is about taking some venison that she had saved for over a year and cooking it for a retired greyhound, for that retired greyhound's last days. And as she's feeding her greyhound, she's thanking the deer and imagining the deer in the crosshairs of a hunter's rifle, and a beautiful testament to obligation, dedication, love, and making hard decisions for, animals that can't make decisions for themselves.
All right. Why don't we start with over here with James?
Hi, if I heard correctly, you were a lawyer and you studied at Georgetown Law School before you transitioned becoming a writer. And I'm just really curious, what inspired that change? Was there anything, I'm just, quite frankly, I'm fascinated by that.
So I went to Howard Law and then Georgetown. So Georgetown, I have an advanced legal degree. I started practicing law because I wanted to be a civil rights lawyer, and I practiced law for several years in that sort of vein. I'd say the only reason I say I went to Georgetown is because I did that after practicing law for a few years, because there's a remedy in civil rights where you can get back pay, but any money that goes into your retirement savings, you don't get that recouped. So you get like 10, 20 years of back pay, you're still missing out on 20 years of your retirement savings that accompanying pay would use. So I wanted to get a degree from Georgetown to help me to work in that space. The transition from practicing law was, for me, a necessary thing, because I think that the law is essential for providing guardrails. I think it's necessary for us to sort of, it's sort of a way where we can sort of remedy incivility, if you will. In the actual framework of the statutes, statutes and regulations come from a lot of horse trading. And so, on the one hand you give, the other you take away. And so you find yourself in a courtroom and you're arguing about what's been said in statutes and regulations, or in old precedent that people are arguing about, and you get sort of handcuffed to what the law says about a group of people, and maybe the law is not tailored necessarily for that group of people. And so for me, I guess spiritually, the transition was much easier, because I wanted to have something to say that sort of fit outside that framework, but still allowed me to be in an advocacy space. The financial jump is a big one, I will say. But, I'm also a person of faith. And so for me, stepping out on faith is the only way I know how to move forward. I know a lot of people are feeling some kind of way about what's going on today. We were going to have to put one foot in front of the other the next day regardless. And it's my faith that allowed me to say, okay, this is the space you need to be in. This is the work you should be doing. So I think everybody has to, if you want to do it, save money. I would definitely say that. And I would say, listen to the voice inside you for the stories you have to tell, because you all are I'm assuming there are a lot of writers in here. And I'm assuming there are a lot of stories in here.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah.
That's great. And Madison, do you have someone there?
I know you said that you didn't really think too much into it, but what about Rosie? Whatever happened to Rosie?
We knew this was going to happen.
So I think the colloquium, let's talk about that in the colloquium, if you don't mind, just because I know there are people in here who haven't read the book. So, okay. I don't want to spoil it for everybody. I will say, for those of y'all who don't know, Rosie is Alice's sister, who they get separated and they go to Chicago. And what happens is, because they're from a more rural place in Alabama, they're writing letters to each other in the early 40s, 50s. And Rosie leaves in 1950, so in the 50s, there's no telephones. Think about it. It's not even like you don't have a phone in your pocket. You don't have a phone in your house. You have to go to the local store to be able to get a telephone and to make a telephone call. And so those bonds are really tenuous. And so Alice and Rosie lose track of each other. So Rosie has moved to Chicago, and she is living her life in Chicago. And I think we're going to have a conversation offline about next steps. I think we're going to have to do that.
Okay. I think another question from the audience. I think you had your hand up right there. Yes. If you want, Madison, you want to come down?
Hello.
Hello.
Okay.
Good morning.
Can I ask one question? So why does patience why does Alice hate patience so much? I thought it was just like the pants thing. Her view.
I think so. This is where I hope that the work challenges y'all to think about these two women absolutely love New Jessup. And they have two, we talk a lot about philosophy, and I think that there's something very important about understanding different philosophical viewpoints. These two women embody that. I mean, we're not talking about Booker T versus Du Bois. We're not doing that whole thing. You're talking about Alice and Patience, who have two very different paths forward. And Alice is somebody who comes from a place where segregation was crushing. And it was a place where she would have had to go in that side door, where, there are diners, for instance, just as an example. Not only could she not go in the front door, she couldn't go inside. Now, they would serve her because they would take her money, but she would get served through a window, right? So Alice comes from that sort of place, and then she ends up in New Jessup, where she has a particular dignity, where it feels very intentional about the way that they live. And she's new to this. This is not how she grew up. Patience grew up in this environment. So she's had this level of independence from, independence loosely, or I'll say that she's lived in this very stable détente from the overarching white supremacy in her space for her entire life. And so for her, she's already in a lot of ways ahead in the race. Alice is coming from a very different place. And so you have to, I think, respect the fact that both women, they're women. I mean, they're individuals with their own feelings about the world, their own experiences, their own backgrounds. Patience knows nothing about what Alice went through as a child. And so, I think there's some of that too, like, you don't know me. You don't know my life. I mean, how many of y'all have ever said that to somebody? You don't know me and you don't know my life. And so if you think about it, Alice and Patience, when they really start to go at it, it's because that's basically what they're saying to each other. Now think about that. You have one place you both love, and both you all are adamant that your way is the right way, and you start attacking one another's backgrounds. And I don't think that comes from a place of hating each other. I think it comes from a place of not understanding each other.
I think we have time for one more audience question. Okay, just right there, Matt. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, I love your book.
Thank you.
But are you making a part 2, and when is it going to come out?
So the next book is not a continuation of New Jessup. The next book is a book that takes place in Gulf Coast, Alabama, in Africa, in a place that's inspired by Africatown. The book after that is Rosie's story.
No.
So I can't tell you when that will come out. I will tell you that the first draft of that book is written. So.
I think we have time for a couple more questions. So Madison down.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This novel, there's a lot of mention of Booker T. Washington, right? Mm-hmm. And it seems that the black nationalism of New Jessup is heavily inspired by his thoughts, and not, for example, Marcus Garvey or like Elijah Muhammad. And so I was wondering, is that like a reflection of your personal beliefs, or is that independent to the characters in the book?
You know what I think is interesting, because I get this question quite a bit. I think it's interesting when you go to these communities. I'm not sure that people would they talk about Booker T. If you said black nationalism to people in these communities, I think they would take issue with that. And it's not necessarily that it doesn't apply, but I do think it's that we have a lot of times used these buzzwords to really make small the diversity of what's going on in a community, right? And so I do know my family is incredibly conservative. If you had told Alice that her views were in line with Malcolm X, she would have been really upset with you, right? Because for her, it's not about philosophy. It's about, this is about our independence. It's about our safety. It's about the safety of it's about the ability to educate our children. You know, you'll notice that the main issues in the book are about the resources, the diversion of resources, and the vote, right? And so I think when we put these sort of big themes and big names on a community like this, we're taking the conversation outside the community. And we're trying to look at it through a more anthropological lens about what all is going on in this house. And so I really think it's important for us when we have these conversations to consider them from inside the house. Because I can guarantee you, my family does not consider themselves Black nationalists, right? I think a lot of times we don't even, like, there's such a huge and diverse school of thought about Pan-Africanism and Black nationalism and what that actually means. We start throwing those buzzwords around and nobody wants to hear it. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's really important, and I'm saying from Black and white perspective, right? But when you're reading New Jessup, my hope is that people say, what all is Alice talking about? What all is Patience talking about? What's Raymond doing today? Because that's where I think the engagement with the work happens.
Thank you. Did you have a question right next to him? This, I think, will be our last question.
So it's not really related to the book, but I was wondering, do you have any advice to anyone who wants to get into creative writing?
You a writer?
A little bit.
The first thing is to write. I mean, it sounds easier than it is, because I run a writing group for my church, and what happens is everybody's real excited about a project or something at the very beginning. Writing requires a lot of discipline, and it requires staying the course. It requires not just writing that first draft and turning it into something. It's about really loving something enough to put the story on the page. So, I mean, the first thing I would encourage anybody to do, if you really say you want to be a writer, is you have to write, but you have to write like you actually believe in the work, that the work deserves your best effort. For me, I wake up every day at 4 a.m., and I'm committed to the craft of it, even when it gets really hard, or even when times like this I feel like powerless in certain ways in the world. I mean, you have to find a way to make sure you get those words on the page every day. Because if you're writing, then you are a writer. The question is, what do you want to do with it?
Great advice. Before we thank our writers, I'd like to remind you that Jamila's book is for sale in the lobby, and I would like to invite you to please come back at 11:30 for the next session with Santiago Garcia and Joangela Edwins. Let's give another round of applause of thanks for Jamila Minnicks and Adam Houle.